Thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Hello, all of you. Thank you for being here. Nice to see you.
What's your experience in Springfield? I mean, been here, Hall of Fame before.
I had the pleasure of being on the Board of Trustees for the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame for a number of years while I was with the NCAA. So I've been in and out of Springfield a number of times over the years, and I always enjoy coming back for the same reason all of you basketball fans do, to see the wonderful facility. And I'm old enough that I was attending the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame long before they had this beautiful facility that we're in today. But even then it was special to come and celebrate the game of basketball on an annual basis. And it's particularly exciting to come back now with the venue that we're in.
Congratulations, first of all, on the honor of soon to be inducted. Take me back to the moment you found out you were a member of the class of 2017. Where were you receiving that phone call?
Well, I'm a native of Oregon. I was on my way to, and I worked for the NCAA for 38 years. I was on my way to the NCAA Final Four this year. I'd just gotten on the airplane, and my phone rang, and I rarely answer the phone when I'm on the airplane, even if I've just gotten on it. But for some reason, I answered the call, and it was John DeLeva, the CEO of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. And I thought, and I saw on my device that that's who it was, and I thought he needed some help of some kind at the Final Four, and so that was the only reason I answered the phone. And he proceeded to tell me that just wants you to know that you're going to be inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. So I was overwhelmed, stunned. I spent my 38 years with the NCAA. I was involved in the total championship program. I had a number of different positions, but the one constant from the day I arrived was administering and the primary administrator for the NCAA, the Final Four, not just the Final Four, but NCAA Division I men's basketball and women's in the championship program. But I probably spent 90% of my time on the NCAA Division I men's basketball championship that grew from not because of me, because of the players playing the game and the coaches coaching the game is the reason that tournament grew as quickly as it did during the 38 years that I was there. So that was a thrill. But so I've worked with a lot of players, I've worked with many, many coaches, but being an administrator, you don't ever think of having the opportunity or being notified that you're going to be inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. So I was stunned, as I say, and still am, but excited to be here.
I'm sure that was quite a plane ride after getting that news and then taking off. You mentioned, born and raised in Oregon. You went to the University of Oregon. Played football.
Kind of.
Kind of.
Yeah. I played basketball in high school, and was small high school, middle classification, and it was easy to be all-state in high school in Oregon during those years. But I went to the University of Oregon on a football scholarship as a quarterback, and was there for the 4 years, and got a master's degree there, and got into private business for several years. And then my coach, Len Casanova, was a Hall of Fame football coach, one of the finest gentlemen that I've ever met. And I think he felt badly. He became the athletic director, and I think he felt guilty or badly because he hadn't given me much playing time when I was a quarterback there for him. It wasn't for that. I wasn't good enough to be the starting quarterback, and Oregon in football wasn't as strong as they are today. But in any event, he asked me, he phoned me in California. I was working for McCormick Schilling Spices, and I know nothing about spices, and I don't know how I even got a job with them, but I've been there about a year, and I got a call from Coach Casanova, and he said, would you be interested in returning to the university and working in the athletic department as a director of events? And I'll never forget this. This goes back a number of years ago, but I was making $12,000 in McCormick Schilling and a company car, and I went back to Oregon for $6,000 and no car, and I couldn't wait to get there. And I'd been there 3 years, and my third year, the NCAA hosted the NCAA Track and Field Championships, and you may remember the name Steve Prefontaine, a great miler, distance runner that we lost at a very early age. One of my side assignments at Oregon was the advisor to the Letterman's Club, and Steve Prefontaine was the president of the Letterman's Club, so I got to know Steve very well. And Bill Bowerman was the Olympic track and field coach and had been the Oregon track coach for many, many years. So we were hosting the NCAA track and field championships, and I was a liaison between the university and the NCAA. And this time, again, I'd grown up in Oregon. I knew very little about the NCAA, but met some people at the NCAA at that point in time. And I'll share one, the toughest administrative experience I've had over the years was not in basketball, not in football, but in track and field. And I'll share it with you. You may get a kick out of it. As I mentioned, Bill Bowerman was a tough Olympic coach and very demanding and tremendously successful, but very demanding. And I played baseball. I knew I wasn't fast enough to run track. I wasn't strong enough to throw the shot put, so track and field was not my sport by any means. And I'm meeting with the NCAA Track and Field Committee, and a guy by the name of DeLoss Dodds was the chairman of the NCAA Track and Field Committee. It was a 12-person committee, and again, these 12 people come into town, and I'm with them for a week. DeLoss ended up being the athletic director of Kansas State, and then he went on to the University of Texas and was the athletic director there for over 30 years and was just honored here within the last year. Tremendous individual, but at that point he was the track and field coach at K-State. And so I'm sitting there with this track and field committee and pretending like I know a little bit about track and field, which I really did not. And they said, we have a problem. We're concerned that the markings on the track at Hayward Field are not accurate. And we need to see Coach Bowerman. Now, Coach Bowerman, at that time, you remember the AAU, which is still alive today, but years ago, the AAU and the NCAA were very competitive and both very strong organizations. The AAU is not quite today what it was in those years, but they had selected Bill Bowerman to be the Olympic track and field coach, and he had a bit of an edge about the NCAA to begin with. And again, I'm a young guy at that time. I didn't know much about the NCAA, but so I'm supposed to go and see Coach Bowerman and tell him we have a problem at Hayward Field. Now, I knew he was going to be upset about this and in disbelief. So I go get him, and he says, "What's the problem?" And I tried to explain it to him, and he was upset, said that cannot be accurate. Take him in to meet the NCAA Track and Field Committee, and DeLoss explains what they think the problem is, that the markings on the relays are inaccurate. They were not marked properly. And Coach Bowerman said, I'm in disbelief, that can't be accurate. So we get up, we leave the dormitory in which we were meeting and walked across the street to Hayward Field and started walking around the track. And sure enough, Coach Bowerman acknowledged that there was a major issue that had to be resolved in the next 16 hours before the track and field meet started the next morning. But a long story about the most pressure I've ever felt under. I didn't know anything about track and field, and I was trying to get Bowerman together with the NCAA people.
Fake it till you make it, right? You had to become an expert overnight.
Yeah.
So you mentioned obviously the NCAA, and you joined the NCAA in 1972, I believe.
Correct.
Those early, days of obviously it was a lengthy career for you there. To just kind of describe the landscape of college athletics and specifically the NCAA basketball tournament and college basketball then compared to what it's turned into now.
Well, the chairman of the the NCAA basketball committee in 1972 when I joined the NCAA was a gentleman by the name of Tom Scott, Dr. Tom Scott. He'd been a coach in North Carolina in earlier years, so I don't think, does anybody here ever remember the name Tom Scott in North Carolina? And I didn't either at the time I joined the NCAA. A real gentleman. He'd been at Davidson College for a number of years, and he was a chairman, an athletic director from Georgia, UCLA, and it was a 6-person NCAA basketball committee. Now, I'm 25 years old and trying to act like I know a little bit about NCAA basketball, and I was learning on the fly. And at that point in time, Dr. Scott was very patient with me, leading me through the ropes. And at that point, now the NCAA basketball bracket was a 25-team bracket as compared to the 68-team bracket now. And so there were very few at-large positions available. But those positions were filled via a telephone conference, about a 3 to 5 hour telephone conference, and it was a 6-person NCAA basketball committee. Athletic directors, prominent athletic directors from around the country were composed the committee. and it was literally depending on the year, a 3 to 5 hour telephone conference where we selected the at-large teams and announced the bracket. And today, and I've been away from the NCAA for 5 years now, but it's the same as it was when I left in terms of the amount of time the NCAA basketball committee devotes to the selection and the bracketing and the seeding of the tournament. And at this point in time, they come in on a Monday. They're there for a full week. And start on Monday, you watch the games together, you meet all day, and the conference tournaments are ongoing. And then as the week goes and teams are knocked out, you go through the seeding process on a daily basis. But it's literally, an 18-hour, the committee devotes between 14 and 18, 16 hours to the bracketing for 7 days prior to the actual announcement on Monday. So it's a week-long, the committee in Indianapolis meeting around the table almost literally throughout the day and the evening, and they let it go as compared to a 3 to 5 hour telephone conference. So it's dramatically changed.
Especially, the scope of everything now with, the access to television and, just the magnitude of the event at this point and how it's grown over, the last 20, 30, 40 years. What do you attribute the biggest change, from where it was to where it's gotten at this point, as far as the magnitude of the event? It's March Madness. It's taking over pretty much an entire month of the sports calendar.
Well, it's interesting. I was having lunch with Fran, works for the Hall of Fame, over lunch, and commented to her. We were talking about Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, and just in the last week on ESPN, was watching the rivalry between Larry and Magic. And how many of you may have seen that ESPN special? Yeah, quite a few. I thought it was really well done. And I was commenting with Fran over lunch that in my mind, Larry Bird and Magic Johnson have not received as much credit as they deserve for, number one, 1979, it was Magic versus Larry. Larry was at Indiana State, and Magic was at Michigan State. And you had, it was played in Salt Lake City, and here you have an outstanding black player, an outstanding white player. The white players from a small school, Indiana State, people know were Indiana University, Bloomington, but not many people knew that Indiana State and Terre Haute had that kind of a basketball program. You have, so you got the struggle between big school, small school, black, white, and it was a tremendous game. Michigan State prevailed, and to this date, the television rating from the 1979 NCAA championship game was the highest in history. And in my mind, I'd been at the NCAA 7 years at that point, and I'm thinking the rating was magnificent, and this is a jump start. And the ratings will continue to grow as years pass. And to this day, even though the revenue, when we've been involved in any number of negotiations with CBS and NBC, the television revenue has jumped from hundreds of thousands to billions of dollars. But the television rating for the NCAA championship game has never surpassed the one from 1979 when it was Larry against Magic. And then the ESPN special that a lot of us saw the other day, I had forgotten that Larry and Magic, the credit that they have received by some, but probably not as many of us, the impact that the two of them had on the NBA. The NBA, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, was not what it is today. In fact, it was floundering in many respects. And today it's on fire. But again, I think Larry and Magic made that happen to a great extent, just as they did with the NCAA Final Four. And the two of them have probably not received as much credit as they deserve.
I'm sure you've been to your share of outstanding games and outstanding moments over the years of tournament games and just college basketball games in general. Is there a few moments that have historic significance that you've been there in person for, or some of the the crazy finishes and things like that that people have seen in March Madness and things like that?
Well, I think one of my favorites, ironically, it was my last year at the NCAA, was Duke versus Butler. Here you had, it was set at the official table for the 38 years that I was there. So on the right side, Coach Krzyzewski, the Hall of Famer, was to my right, and to my left was Brad Stevens. And you all know him a lot better now since he's been with the Boston Celtics than you did when he was at Butler University. And I remember sharing this with Fran over lunch. Butler was playing in the preseason NIT that the NCAA had purchased, and it was at Madison Square Garden. And they had a common meal room for the teams to have breakfast together and meals. And I walked in one day and had breakfast to talk to a couple of individuals. I'm on my way out of the room, and I see an individual seated at a table by himself, young guy. Had no idea who it was, and I had no meeting to go to, and I thought I'm just going to go over and say hello. Walked over and introduced myself, and the individual was Brad Stevens, and he was the assistant coach at Butler University. And we sat and talked for 10 or 15 minutes, and as I got up and walked away, I said to myself, you know, this individual is very, very impressive, and he has a great future. Now, I didn't think he'd be coaching the Boston Celtics today, but I was very, very, very impressed with him. And so you asking my favorite Final Four was really the one with Mike on one end, and here you have Brad Stevens on the other end, a Hall of Famer, and this young coach who, even at that time, many people thought he is really an up-and-comer. And I think he's more of an up-and-comer than even the most positive people thought at that point in time. And so seeing him down at the other end, and then you all remember the last shot of the game, Gordon Hayward had the shot from midcourt on the sideline, and if it had been an inch lower, the ball would have gone in. And if it had, Butler would have won the national championship. And to this day, I think it would have been, you know, by far the most exciting NCAA championship game in history, and it still was one of the very best.
Well, now obviously with, you know, Gordon Hayward signing with the Celtics and those two being reunited, I mean,
yeah, it's very
hopefully that shot will go in a few times for the Celtics moving forward.
Very exciting.
You mentioned, you know, Final Fours have just turned into such a huge event, and the scale of the, you know, the domes and buildings that they're being played in now is such a huge thing. I mean, we had, you know, former Lakers Shannon Brown was in here yesterday. He was talking about his Final Four experience at Michigan State in, I think, 2005 against North Carolina. And, you know, they played in a dome. And, you know, this past tournament, the championship game, I want to say, had 75,000+ people in it. Just to the magnitude of what it's turned into, and we've talked about that. But the fact that these Final Four games have so many people in attendance and the sport has so much interest now, I mean, what do you attribute that to as far as the product itself?
Well, I think it's a very good question. Number one, basketball is such an easy game for anybody to play. Everybody in this room, smallest youngster in the room to the oldest, could go get around basketball and go shoot and play and enjoy the game. You can't do that in football. You can't do it in basketball. Soccer, you can go out and kick the ball around, but it's an easy game for people to learn how to play, and I think that has been very advantageous. The domes, I'll never forget, don't remember exactly what year it was, but for many, many years, the NCAA championship, Final Four, was conducted in conventional basketball facilities, which is very, very exciting for those few that have an opportunity to buy a ticket. And they were conducted in buildings from capacity of 12,000 to maybe 20,000 at the most. And so the NCAA had to make about 1,500 to 2,000 tickets available for the National Association of Basketball Coaches. A television contract required that we made X number of tickets available to CBS or NBC, whoever was a carrying network. So Athletic Directors Association had X number of tickets, so there ended up being very few tickets available for the general public, the people that really make the game what it is today. So I was on the early bandwagon when I was with the NCAA that I think it's time that we move the NCAA Final Four to dome facilities. And that was very controversial at the time. Some of you may remember it, but it did not go down well. Why are we moving the game of basketball from this kind of a facility and larger to a dome? Domes are for football and other events. But one of the primary reasons was that during those between the last 4 or 5 years, when we were in the conventional buildings, the athletic directors from the participating institutions would talk to me at the site of the Final Four or thereafter, saying that one of the worst experiences that they had had as an athletic director was trying to determine who is going to receive Final Four tickets when their team got to the NCAA Final Four in a conventional building. And he said, we get enough tickets, and generally the teams were getting about 1,000 tickets for their institution to participate in the Final Four in a conventional building. And they would say, and these were different people, one-on-ones with me, saying, we had enough tickets to take care of the individuals that are giving us a lot of money, but the individuals that are younger in the 25, 35, 40 age bracket that are just starting to generate a lot of revenue in their job, they're at the point now where they're able to give, but we don't have enough tickets to help them out to get them to the Final Four. And they are so upset that they're going to quit giving what they're giving now. And they said, this job of an athletic director, when your team's in the Final Four, is one of the worst things. It should be one of the best things that's ever happened. It ends up being one of the worst things, most difficult things for an athletic director. And that got me thinking, maybe it's time we further explore the feasibility of going to domes. And you may remember years before I was even with the NCAA, they had a Final Four in Houston, and they had it set up like a boxing ring. In the middle, it was elevated, and the seating, the sight lines were horrible. And when I joined the NCAA and started talking about going to a domes, that people said, no, we did that once in Houston. It was horrible. We don't want to do that again. But a few more years passed, and because of the pressure we were receiving from athletic directors, not being able to accommodate all the people that the respective institutions needed and wanted to be there, that was really what prompted us to go to a domes. And one last thing on that, I'll never forget, the first one we explored was the dome in New Orleans. So I went down there on a couple different visits for football games, and I walked up to the highest seat in the dome and sat and talked, and I walked around and talked to between 8 and 12 different people, and boys, girls, ladies, elderly people, and asked them, okay, tell me about the seat. What kind of an experience are you having as a spectator for this particular event, whatever it was at that time? And they said, we're just pleased to be here. It's a horrible seat, but the big difference in that point, and it's even more now, is that they've got the great reader boards, scoreboards with the instant replay now that when I go to events, I'll sit there and watch that, even though, and I feel like I'm at home in my living room and not watching a whole lot of it going on the floor. So that was a big breakthrough, and that helped the institutions immensely, being able to provide them 5,000 to 7,000 tickets rather than 1,000 tickets, and made it much easier.
You mentioned, difficulties, and I'm sure you've seen, many challenges with the NCAA and trying to, grow the event. So, it's our Hager Innovator question of the day, presented by our friends at Hager Clothing. I wanted to ask you, as far as those challenges in growing the event over the course of the year, what are some of the biggest obstacles that have kind of gotten in the way, and you guys have had to kind of hurdle and navigate the waters in order to continue growing the product every year? Because I know it's obviously a difficult thing to want to keep growing something, year after year when, it's a great product. But as far as some of those early hurdles for you guys, what do you think some of the toughest things were for the NCAA in growing the basketball tournament early on?
Well, I think we've covered it mostly when we went from the conventional building to the domes. So that was more controversial than I've been able to explain. And but once we got in them and it became customary and they had a better understanding, I think people accept it now. One of the things that's also helped is that the basketball committee would always have an annual meeting with the National Association of Basketball Coaches, their board of directors. We would meet every summer for a day together and talk about what can we do as a NCAA basketball committee to improve the NCAA basketball tournament. So we thought it was always very important to have dialogue with the coaches, and this was the prominent coaches that end up on the NABC board of directors. So, and the coaches would have any number of things from dressing rooms aren't equal to sure. Mundane things that you don't think much of until you sit there and listen to the coaches talk about it. But having dialogue with them on an annual basis really helped us a lot, solving the little things that pop up.
Mm-hmm. Final question I did want to ask. You kind of look up here, and it's definitely a big moment for people to see kind of, the legends of the game and Hall of Famers that have come before. And, now that you're going to be, joining this prestigious institution in just 2 months. You know, what's it like to be here for you, walking in, knowing that, you know, pretty soon you're going to be amongst, you know, everybody, all these great names and faces up here?
Well, it's very, very humbling, and as I've said, even though I played a fair amount of high school basketball, I've told some of my friends that my high school basketball teammates are going to say that the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame's lost all credibility if Tom Jernstedt is going into the Hall of Fame. Holy smokes! But so they don't understand that I'm not being in here. I'm not coming in as a former player. It was for other matters. But anyway, we've got a good joke out of it along the way. Had fun with it. But it's staggering and a bit overwhelming, and I'm very, very humbled by it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. Do we have a question?
What's the motivation behind starting the NCAA tournament, given the NIT established at that time? Was it a perceived financial opportunity?
Motivation behind going from the NIT to the NCAA?
Yeah, the NIT was not run by collegiate institutions, and there was growing pressures from a certain element of the membership saying, the NCAA should have its own tournament. NIT's been good for college basketball, but the game is growing, and the NCAA should have its own tournament. We want to support the NIT, so that was it in brief. And then as years went on, the NCAA purchased the NIT, and I was involved in that negotiation, and we wanted to continue to make the NIT as strong as we could, but the game was becoming so popular and growing so fast, so we thought there should be another opportunity, and the pressure was coming from the NCAA membership. Pardon? No, it didn't. No, it didn't.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Have a round of applause for Tom Jernstedt. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks so much. Thank you.